and for being part of Process Palooza. My name is Nikki Quinta. I'm part of the Process Palooza committee, and I want to welcome you to this session, which is part of our people and culture. And this is Process Landscape, Forging Your Path Through Dense Process Jungles. And our speaker today is Prachi Raheja. She is, sorry, let me flip to this, the program manager for continuous improvement within UC San Diego's IT services department.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thanks, Prachi.
Hello, everyone. Area. You're going to create a strategy to explore this area. You're going to think about where this area is getting its water from. You're going to think about where the area has its best wildlife. If you need to reach a specific destination within this area, how are you going to get there? So as I'm asking all these questions to you, you're probably thinking, just by looking at this picture, really? Like, how can I answer all these questions just by looking at this picture? So I'm going to be a good host today, and I'm going to give you a little bit more cue into this. And there, now you have some boundaries to this area. And now that you have the boundaries to this area, I'm going to ask you the same questions. Can you navigate the area now? Can you get a cue into how this area is getting its water from? What is the wildlife here? Can you navigate yourself to a certain point if you need to go in this area? How will you navigate yourself to a certain point if you need to kind of take a journey within this area? Can you do it now? Is it any better than before? Not really. You have a little bit more information here. You know the boundaries of this area now, but you still really don't know how to navigate yourself through this area. So there you go. How about now? Does that give you a better picture? All right. So people who are familiar with the San Diego Zoo might have recognized it. All right. I see some nods there. And now that you're looking at this picture, now you know where the streets are going, where the wildlife is. You know, there are some interesting areas here. You see this one over here that says closed during construction. And keep that in mind because it might become more relevant as we talk about processes and how we navigate these processes in a dense process jungle. And so with this view now, you are probably able to tell, if you're going to navigate yourself to a certain area, if you want to visit the pandas, how will you go there? If you want to visit the chimpanzees, how do you get there? You can probably figure that out in a better way now. Why is that? Why do you think now you have a better set of information or you have a better insight into you can navigate there? Yes.
Everything is labeled.
Everything is labeled. Yes, that's right. Good point. Yes. There is clear paths. There is clear paths. Yes. What else? Anything else? There is images. You can see more clearly what's going on. Did anyone notice that we do have, indication of, let's say, where the restaurants are or where the restrooms are, but we don't have the menu of the restaurant right here on this page, right? We don't have what the restaurant is serving. Why is that?
Not relevant for navigating.
It's not relevant for navigating the map. And that's almost too much information. That's too much information that you don't need at this level. Once you navigate yourself to the restaurant, well, now you may need that information. So with that in mind, basically what this is this becomes your map, your baseline, a symbolic representation of selected characteristics, not every single piece of information, but selected characteristics of a place, usually drawn on a flat surface. And maps represent information about that place in a simple visual way. And that's where the process landscape comes into picture. And that's what a process landscape really is. So what is a process landscape? Whenever we are doing any kind of process analysis, we are typically looking for these three pieces of information. What do we do? What are the processes that we're doing? How do we do it, which is your detail about that process? And who does it? Who are the process owners? Who are the game players? So when we are putting a process landscape in place, we're mostly only focusing on the aspect of what is it that we do. We're not going into the depths of how we do it. We're not going into the depth of who does it. We will do all that. We will probably need that information, but not when we are putting the process landscape together. And so the goal that then becomes when we are putting a process landscape together is to represent a complete business process area on a one single page. And some of you might find this, a little bit constrictive, or, might find it uncomfortable. How can I represent a large area such as a financial administrative area, or let's say the entire area of student administration systems, or the entire area of research administration systems? These are large process areas we are talking about. We're not talking about, this is a recruitment process. This is how we start the recruitment. This is how we end the recruitment. We're talking about an umbrella of processes that has multiple processes under it. And so you might find it challenging and think, how can I represent this on a single piece of paper? So think about it this way. Some of you who are into organization, and there is, so much video content available these days, there is something called as a container concept, which means when you're organizing your things, or let's say you're organizing your office desk, you assign a container to yourself. My pens go in this container. And so all the pens that fit in that container are going to stay. If there's anything extra, it's going to go away. I probably don't need more pens than what fits in this container. So think of it that way. Any information that fits on a single page, you should be able to use that for a process landscape. Just like we don't need the restaurant menu right when we're looking at the entire map, you may not need all, the intricate details of a process on the first view. You first need to understand, what is happening in this big administrative area. What are my big milestones? What are my paths? And that's what a process landscape is going to do for us. And now, I want to share a real life example that we used at UC San Diego. We recently embarked on, a massive initiative called Enterprise Systems Renewal, where we are switching out all of our major administrative systems, including research administration system, student administration system, financial administration system. And we, the goal was to accomplish it in 5 years. We're almost at the end of that, 5-year period at the moment. And here is an example of how we captured the process landscape for student administration, for example. When we started building this landscape, and we were like trying to bring together all the stakeholders, and that's always an important part of the exercise, like identifying the right stakeholders across the campus. That can be a whole different session on its own. But once you have the right people in the room and you start discussing what are the processes that are engaged in this area, the process landscape is not going to look like that right away. At one point when we started, we just had 11 blocks of big processes just overlapping each other, because the initial thought process that everyone thinks of is everything is happening in parallel, at the same time. But then when you, kind of investigate deeper and start to think about how can we represent it so that it's meaningful, but at the same time, it has a starting point and an ending point. So process boundaries are really important. What's a process boundary? Where does the process start? Where does it end? And you may not, like, for example, for pre-enrollment, we decided that the pre-enrollment step ends at student onboarding. Now, that was a really interesting discussion, because student onboarding can continue through the period of enrollment as well. But for the purpose of this process landscape, we decided that we're going to put a boundary here, and that's how we're going to represent our student administration process landscape. And so we ended at student onboarding. We started whenever a student adds or drops or changes a class, that's where enrollment starts. So for each one of these purple boxes that you see out there, we then, kind of dissected it further and decomposed it into the blue boxes. But for a second, let's just focus on the purple boxes. So at a high level within student administration, we identified we have pre-enrollment, enrollment, post-enrollment, and then student finance that runs all across these three areas. And then teaching and learning, which is a separate thing on its own, within which we have curriculum, teach, and learn. And at a highest level, that represents all the high level processes that are going on within student administration for UCSD. Then, of course, we went to the next step and we decomposed each one of these purple boxes into the blue boxes. And we went a layer further. So, if you see the purple box that we saw in the previous slide now is represented by level 1, which is pre-enrollment, which is then decomposed into level 2. And then we also decomposed it into level 3. There's a specific reason why you don't see any arrows flowing here, because it's not always necessarily, step 1, step 2, step 3 in a chronological order like that, at least at this level. There could be processes that are running in parallel. So we tried to follow a format here and stay as chronological as possible, but it's not necessary that everything is happening one after the other. There could be overlaps here. And that's why we don't have any arrows running through it. But the goal was to identify what's happening at the highest level. If you decompose it down further, it'll look like the second line that we have there, level 2. And then at level 3, the 1.1 is, vertically decomposed, 1.2 is vertically decomposed, and so on and so forth. And so we went and, we identified kind of all the 3 layers for every single one of the purple boxes that you see in level 1. One thing I want to point out here, and as I'm going to, I'm just going to kind of slide through this because this is just a representation of all of those 7 boxes that you saw earlier. And I just want to show you that, we did it for every single level 1 box. I want to acknowledge that it is at level 3, which is the, gray boxes, where we are able to make informed decisions about those processes, such as, are we going to keep this process when we go into our future state? Or are we going to retire it? Like if we are still talking at the highest level, we wouldn't be able to make that assessment. Student finance, there's so much going on within that. We can't make assessments at that level. So it's really at level 3 that we are able to make decisions. Are we going to keep this process? Is it going to go in our future state? Yes, no, yes. If it is going to go in our future state, the process that we have today, are we happy with it or do we want to improve it? Now, we may not be happy with that process, but it may not be the highest of our priority to fix it because there's probably more friction in other areas. So we may make an informed decision and say, all right, this process is there, it needs improvement, but it's not the highest friction point. So we're going to leave it as such for now and focus on other areas. There might be another process out there that is, let's say, for example, remit employment fees. And we say that this is a really high friction process. We have to improve this process. This needs to reach a certain standard of improvement before we move it into our next system or next technology. We don't want to do bad process in and bad process out in the next system. So this process landscape really allowed us to take a look at our processes from the point of view of how do we want to improve our processes before we go into the new technology, and not just replace our systems, but also look at the processes behind it. And so, by doing this activity, we were really able to make confident and informed decisions about each one of those areas. And, like I said, we may choose to not do anything about the process, but now we're making a conscious decision and we're saying, okay, we're staying put on this for now. So for each one of those gray boxes that you saw, now we were ready to make these process diagrams or flow charts or swim lane diagrams, whatever you may want to call them. And we did this activity that you're seeing over here. We created like 233 such process maps, only for 70 of those gray boxes that we identified that, these are the ones we're going to work on. The rest, we left them aside, that we're not going to work on these right now. So the ones that were identified for process improvement, the ones that were prioritized for process improvement, were then taken for further deep dives and more analysis. And following the same methodology, we were actually able to create a process landscape at the entire campus level too. So the one that you saw before was just student administration. And let's see where student administration is over here. So here is where the student administration is. And you see pre-enrollment, enrollment, student finance, post-enrollment, and you see campus life here, but we need to update it. Like after doing the entire process landscape for student, we clearly need to update this and bring it up to speed with what we have in the detailed process landscape. But basically, this process allowed us to view all of our processes at the higher level. So this process landscape that you're seeing is even one level higher than the one that you saw with the purple boxes. But the same methodology is being followed here as well. So when we are putting a process landscape together, it becomes basically an art of simplification. That's what we are trying to do here. We're trying to simplify. And so what are the principles that you want to keep your thoughts focused on when you are, let's say, facilitating a process landscape session, or you're doing process landscaping for your own processes, within your own area? I wouldn't say process landscape is appropriate for a small process, because if it's a small process that you're dealing with, you can just directly make a process map out of that. But if you're dealing with a larger area and you want to see what the contents are within that area and then prioritize and then go to each of those process pockets, that's where process landscape comes in handy. And that's where you would want to keep these principles in mind. So you're then trying to think about capabilities and functions of that area rather than the org structure. So many times we get tripped on it. This is what my department does, and then that's it. But when we are putting process landscape together, we always bring people from different departments together. And we try to see what happens when this department throws over the process over the fence to the other department. And just by bringing all those stakeholders together in a room, it does some kind of a magic that has never happened before. We were able to break down so many silos where not just silos in terms of course, the departments learned a lot about what the other department is doing, how they're using that information that we are putting together in the systems, how is the next department using it. That knowledge definitely increased, but also in terms of developing better understanding about each other's work, during those sessions when we were all together, that happened a lot. Like, sometimes we would have meetings where someone from finance would say, but IT doesn't do, a good job with this piece. And then there's a person from IT sitting in that meeting and they're like, I am IT, like I do what you are, throwing over the fence. Tell me how you want me to improve it. What can I do so it serves you better? Because so many times the people on the other side of the fence, they're very well intentioned. They want to do the right thing, but they just don't know what is it that's going to serve the department that they're serving the best way. And so we were able to break so many silos beyond just looking at the org structure while being in these process landscape sessions. So when we are in the process landscape session, we're mostly focusing on what is it that we are doing and not how we are doing it. We get to that later when we are doing the detailed process maps and flow diagrams and all that. But when we are doing a process landscape at a higher level, when you're trying to create those purple boxes, when you're trying to create those blue boxes, you're focusing on what is it that we do and not how do we do it. We may come up with new terms, so often we were calling a process, we were recognizing it by the department name. This is what happens here. But when we are putting a process landscape together, we came up with new terms that were more process focused rather than department focused. And so be open to creating those terms, even though they may not exist, in the department language. What else? To and fro discussions, so many times, like more agreements were reached, or more, like I said, better understanding was developed through these sessions. And that requires a lot of to and fro discussion between people that are new to that process or that don't know a certain part of that process. Remember that we're not writing a novel, we're just writing the title of it. So, process landscape needs to be focused on that. And so often it takes a lot of hard work to create something simple. And, just to share a little bit more insight into the process landscape that you saw earlier, not the campus level one that took even way more effort, but the student level one, the student process landscape that you saw, the first page that you saw initially. Just to put that process landscape together, we had 15 workshops of 90 minutes each, engaging participation from subject matter experts around the campus, and the number of subject matter experts that we engaged to put that process landscape together was 200. Around 200 people were engaged in just putting that one pager together. So it might look very simple, but in the end, it's really, it gives a sense of understanding when we put that process landscape in front of executives or in front of people who are trying to make decisions about how to implement these, these new systems, or how to do change management around them, or who to engage and who not to engage, or who could be impacted. So this is just a starting point that allows us to make more informed decisions. So now I'm just sharing with you some of the pictures that are from those process landscape sessions. This is what our meetings looked like during the when everybody was online, and we were trying to put everything together for student administration. You were all online, and we had actually started the process of putting those process landscapes together before we went into remote state of work. And this is what it looked like when we were in the conference rooms and putting it together. Of course, it was much better to do the use the tools that we were using online, because then our post-its never fell on the ground. But it feels prehistoric now. All right. So as a process landscape facilitator, your job then becomes to be curious, to engage your stakeholders. Like if you're one of the process landscape facilitators, you definitely don't want to be one of the subject matter experts. One of the subject matter experts who is invested in the process and knows a certain aspect of the process may not be the best person to facilitate a process landscape session. You would want to engage someone who's a neutral facilitator, who probably knows less about a certain aspect of a process and is able to ask those very simple basic questions. Like, what are we trying to accomplish here, or what is the goal of this process, and not be biased towards a certain part of the process or a certain department. So it's best to bring a neutral facilitator in. I saw there was a hand here. Yes. We use ProMap for our process mapping and process improvement, and we really benefited from the software. But I wanted to kind of stay away from the software during this session. I'm happy to connect with you more on ProMap later. So basically, what you can do as a neutral facilitator, if you are one of the people who are facilitating these process landscape sessions, is you can help these teams to consolidate process clusters. Someone who can ask the right questions, like I said before, and then also see where the similar processes are aligning together. Put them together in a cluster, propose, maybe just like how we did, pre-enrollment. That was basically a cluster that came together from all of these post-it. The previous picture that you saw where there were all these post-its, that's what we were trying to do there. We were trying to, have what is happening in this area, what is happening in that area, and then cluster them together. So we could come up with a higher level process umbrella, which we could then use for one of those purple boxes or one of the blue boxes, which is a higher level box. we want to, as a neutral facilitator, we also want to make sure that we're bringing the focus of the team back to what is it that we are trying to deliver through this process? What is it that we're trying to do? You'll see that as a running theme through this session, that we're constantly bringing the focus back on that one-page document that defines what is it that we're doing, and that benefits the business side of it. Like I said before, we can go down the rabbit holes, which is something very often that the subject matter experts want to do. It's so common, and it's good to actually hear them out and get some of that content out there on the table. But a lot of times, all of that content belongs in the parking lot for the process landscape sessions, because we're constantly trying to remind the subject matter experts that you will get a chance to go down the rabbit holes. We will do that, but process landscape is not the time to do that. So once you have this map, it becomes, process landscape becomes your map to navigate your process jungle then. So once you have this map, it provides that common basis for planning that all different teams can use for various purposes. Like when we had the process landscape now for student administration, the change management team was using it in a completely different way. The process analysis team was using it in a completely different way. The implementation team was using it in a different way. The executives who were making decisions about these systems were using it in a different way. But every team was able to leverage from that process landscape because, well, now we have a view of what's going on in the student administration area. It encapsulates what the business is doing right now, because process landscape can also change depending on if you introduce any new functions or if you introduce any part of business that didn't exist before. But process landscape changes way less frequently than your process maps do. Process maps are all about how we do that. We do that particular piece of the process, and that can change. A business owner needs to own that process map or that flow chart. They need to own it, and they need to keep updating it as the process changes. But process landscape sees changes less often, because ultimately what we are trying to deliver as a business stays more stable than how we do it. And so there could be changes to the process landscape, but they're less frequent. So the process landscape encapsulates what the business is doing right now. So that's, again, something that needs to be kept in mind, that if that changes, the process landscape needs to reflect that. Like I, shared earlier, for us, it prepared us for an intentional transformation. It was a very good tool for us to use as a foundation to prepare for the transformation that we were going to step into. Through the process landscape, we were able to involve appropriate stakeholders and define a strategy. Because, before we jumped into looking into detailed processes and mapping out process flows, before doing that, we put the process landscape together. And so in the process of putting the process landscape together, we engaged those high-level stakeholders. And remember, I mentioned before that just for student administration, we used more than 200 subject matter experts. So during that process, guess what? 200 subject matter experts are now getting to know about this is what's coming next. So in a way, it's kind of also helping with the change management, with the people side of change management, because we're engaging them right at the beginning of the journey, rather than, all right, what's your process? Show us your process. By that time, we are, the train has already left. But now here in the process landscape, we're right from the beginning, we're engaging them. Enabling discussions about what needs to be done to meet the current and future challenges. So once you have the process landscape, now we can make informed decisions and evaluate our processes. Like I said, we liked doing it at level 3, because at level 3, we were able to make those informed decisions about whether the process needs improvement. Whether that process needs to be simplified. Do we need to reduce waste in that process? Do we need to build in standardization in that process? As we were going through the process landscape activity, we also rated each process at level 3 on a pain score, or like I said before, we had these friction points and we rated them. We kind of gave a score to each one of those pain points, and we came up with a strategy to assign a pain score to each one of these level 3 processes. And so when we were doing the prioritization, that really helped us in doing the prioritization, because if an area had a higher pain score, or if it had a lot of friction points, then it clearly says, okay, this process needs improvement versus another process that may not have that high of a pain score. So that was a part of the evaluation. Carrying forward to current state, like I said, some of the processes, after due consideration, a decision was made to carry them forward in the new system with the possibility of reviewing it at a later time. Some of the processes were completely out of scope, and some of them were going to be retired. So even though we decided, out of these 4 categories, 3 are such that we decided to not do anything about these 3 categories, but we felt much more comfortable not doing anything about them because we were making a conscious decision to do so. And, I've included some links here, which you might be able to access. The slideshow is going to be available on the Process Palooza website after the event. And you'll be able to see, the process landscape that I shared earlier. But other than that, if you want to find out more about what's happening in the continuous improvement area at UCSD, please visit ci.ucsd.edu. If you have any other questions, I'm here for the rest of this session.